listening to The Annie Fry Show. Interact with Annie on Facebook, The Annie Fry Show.
Welcome back to The Annie Fry Show. Crane Durham sitting in for Annie Fry. Well-deserved break and privilege, honor, and blessing to be here. Thank you, Annie, for the opportunity. You do a great job, and obviously your audience knows how much they love you because that's why they're your audience, and it's growing and growing and growing, and such success. That in part due to Katie Bailey and Tony Colombo and the rest of the team, because you have a great team, as anybody's success is a team effort of putting it all together. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to each and every one of you for taking the time to listen. I am grateful to this man. This man is in demand because he is a solid guy. He is a man who has served our country, and he stood up for the truth in the way of calling out jihadism and radical Islam, Islamism as we know it, Islamic supremacy. And his name is Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. He is author of Battle for the Soul of Islam. And Zuhdi, Doctor, thank you for taking the time today to talk about something I've been highly critical of, and that has been the president's move to remove troops, to pull out, to withdraw from Syria, as well as Afghanistan. I just see across the chyron that he's saying he's not pulling out of Iraq, but I'm sitting there thinking, Syria, 2,000 troops, Afghanistan, you are pulling out troops, and you're sending a signal, and you're taking the word, reportedly, at least some reports have said, of Erdogan. And I think that is disastrous. Your thoughts?
Crane, it's great to be with you again. Thanks for having me. It's also great to reconnect with you. Wow, I don't know where to start other than a lot of the little sound bites President Trump has been providing have been just fraught with confusion. And, you know, listen, I understand, and the rest of us understand that he campaigned on pulling out troops, and he reports that he's keeping to his promises. But ISIS was defeated 6 months into Secretary Mattis's term as the Secretary of Defense. So, yes, President Trump gave him the green light that Obama never did, and allowed the decimation of ISIS, but that was a year ago. And ISIS might have been lost their command and control in Raqqa, but jihadists have been teeming in Syria. Hundreds of groups of Al-Qaeda type of groups. If ISIS wasn't still there, why does Turkey now need to amass tanks on the border, which is exactly what they're doing? The Kurds are saying that we're abandoning them. And then when you talk about troops, I really think it's deceptive to say that we had, you know, he's pulling out troops for a promise. 2,000 troops, special forces, where we lost, and again, we shouldn't lose any lives, but we've only lost 4 in the last year there, compared to the 10,000 Kurds that were lost in that same region fighting ISIS. So we were purely in a defensive intel posture, which we are present all over the world. We've got troops in Somalia, we've got troops in a lot of places unrelated to actual commander-in-chief type of deployments of forces. So I really think it's a bit deceptive to say, well, now I'm going to pull out troops, when in fact we really didn't have a major deployment effort in Syria. It was purely a special forces intel operation. And the pulling out, the vacuum that's going to cause is a green light to Erdogan, who apparently President Trump on his own in a phone call just sort of handed it to really one of the sources of the world's greatest threats of jihadism is the jihadists of Erdogan, who are not only going to decimate the Kurds, but really have had no interest in getting rid of the ISIS ideology, which is really what their Muslim Brotherhood type party in Turkey is all about. So the layers of confusion and I think wrong-headedness, we did not win in Syria. I think jihadists are winning. Nobody said we should be there for regime change, but there really is no strategy. And he didn't really lay out the plan to the American public about what exactly is the strategy there for what his plans are over the next year.
Over the last few years, I know you have heard the comparisons to one Ronald Reagan for Donald Trump, our president. And as glad as I am that he won the election, there are things that I'm troubled by with this comparison, because President Reagan understood what he was fighting in the way of atheistic communism, and he had an agenda. And between Pope John Paul II, Margaret Thatcher, and President Reagan, what they did was articulate a message, and Reagan specifically was making that call to the idea of human freedom and people desiring to be free. And here we are in a divided world and calling out and challenging the evil empire. This first question, can you apply that kind of paradigm in the way of messaging to Islamism in the form of a theocratic Iran Shia versus the Sunnis, Wahhabis, Salafists, in the way to combat it? And if so, how much a part of the war and fight is making that case not only on a yearly basis, but a daily basis?
You know, I'm so glad you brought up Reagan, because, Reagan defeated the Soviets through strength, but ultimately never really deployed troops other than through, our bases that existed. In fact, he pulled us out of Lebanon, which was the last time, Hezbollah significantly killed over 200 troops of ours in that base in Lebanon. But Reagan understood what the ideology was we were fighting, and I thought President Trump did too. In the campaign, he had mentioned the threat of Islamism. He talked about engaging with reformers in that speech he gave in August before the election. And yet that seems to now be abandoned, where even National Security Advisor Bolton's strategy to focus the threat which is coming from Iran, to reinstate the sanctions, etc., that is all falling apart now by handing Syria to Iran. And, President Trump tweeted 2 days ago that, well, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will rebuild Syria. We don't need to do that, and he wants to save the taxpayers' money. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia would never rebuild a country that's a client state of Iran. Something is just not connecting there. Syria is basically a client state of Iran. There's hardly any portion of it left run by the Syrian Democratic Forces. I think ultimately we need to have a strategy. I was hoping that Trump doctrine would be limited use of forces at all, but if we do, we need to target the ideology of political Islam globally and be as forceful as he was in the campaign and claiming and reporting that the threat is, just like he did with the so-called Muslim ban, which was not a Muslim ban, it was an Islamist ban. And that's really what we need to do to protect our borders, is to begin to have a discussion about the ideology coming from 56 Muslim majority countries, and even from Europe. Muslims there that are radicalized should not be coming here if they're Islamist in ideology. And all of that, to hand that over to Erdogan, who's working with really the new axis of evil, which is Iran, Turkey, and Qatar. That axis, now to hand Syria to them, puts the biggest threat to the region at the doorstep of Israel, to the Mediterranean, and now you have a Shia Islamist crescent, because the jihadis, Crane, that are teaming in Syria are not only the Sunni ones of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Jabhat al-Nusra, etc., but the Shia ones of Hezbollah, the Iraqi Shia movement, and the Iranian Khomeinists. So that nexus is right there, and our troops were providing a defensive buffer zone there, pretty safely, actually. And now with that gone, I'll give it 6 to 12 months before you see some major conflict between the Kurds, the Turks, the Khomeinists, and the Sunnis.
And it's so interesting because there are those like Senator Rand Paul who, yeah, there are things I agree with him on, and there are things I've always disagreed with him on. And it is interesting because this has been one of those things. And he's characterized, I know people frame debates in order to win. I get it. But this is not about going in and invading the world and in the way of using troops at the front end and then attempting to have regime change, though I think there are ways to accomplish regime change specifically in Iran. But that's over time. Here's my point. The framing of the debate and discussion about the use of our troops in the war that we are in against Islamic supremacists, be they Shia or Sunni, is so dishonest. And there is this idea of, well, cut number 2, if we could. Here is Rand Paul from this weekend. Roll it. Cut 2.
I would have declared victory long ago and come home. And so when the president declares victory over ISIS, he's exactly right. We took back 99% of their land. Aren't these people going to stand up and now fight for themselves? Can they not do anything?
You know what really I find, I found that to be in a way offensive because of what we're talking about and who the people are. But I remember President Obama saying, hey, you know what? I'm not going to go after and be the Iraqi Air Force for ISIS to take pressure off the Iraqi government from getting its stuff together. And that was disastrous because it created that vacuum, and it was filled, and a JV team became varsity, and it was already varsity, as you well know. These are things, everything I've said, I pretty much understand. Either you've taught me, you've talked about it, or discussed it. And so I know you know this, but what do you say to people who say, hey, look, the people that we've been defending and everything, they need to do it because we can't put American blood on the line to do what they should be doing. You mentioned 10,000 Kurds.
There is a hall that has pictures of those 10,000 Kurds in a memorial to their loss, and there are 4 pictures of Americans that gave their lives in that fight in Syria, and bless their souls. But to say that they did nothing is beyond offensive from good Senator Paul. And, listen, to say that, my family in Aleppo and Damascus have done nothing. When you have 10 million Syrians displaced, you have a Syrian ethnic cleansing where a country that used to be 21 million people in 2011 is now 16 million people. And 10 million of them are migrating. And so you have a Shiite population that now went from an Alawite, rather, which is the sectarian Islamist of Assad. Assad sort of claiming to share our values. I mean, Paul's position is beyond hypocritical because during the campaign, he loved talking about Obama being the founding fathers of ISIS, and yet gladly voted to keep the Iran deal intact, never claimed to speak against any of the crimes against humanity done by the Khomeinis or by Assad. And I'm sure the Assad lobby is working very closely with the Rand Paul office. And at the end of the day, it's quite a work of fiction to take somebody's position on these things from just the Sunni attacks versus, like you said, it's both Sunni and Shia that are bad, and we don't need to have too many troops there. But to say they haven't done anything is just, ask the Israelis. The Israelis are not, Netanyahu is certainly not pleased that his greatest ally in the world is exiting the region completely and giving the green light to Iran, and that's why today we're starting to see some firing into Syria from Israel, because the Turkish army is not going to be actually killing ISIS the way President Trump said they're going to do. They're actually going to be using it to go in and decimate the Kurds. So this region will continue to bear out those who know what's going on. We'll see what happens. It's not rocket science. It's hundreds of years of things that will evolve, which I hope will evolve in the way of democratization in the long term, but it's not going to happen overnight. We kept a presence in Germany and elsewhere. And Afghanistan, I think, is a different animal. We can talk about whether I may even be in favor of pulling out troops from there, but then again, the Taliban will likely reconstitute there also. So, it's just beyond frustrating. On the one hand, you see so much good domestically by his economic policies. On the other hand, sort of a shoot from the hip foreign policy where he's ignoring all of the advice that he's getting, it appears, is beyond frustrating.
It's very frustrating. And in your opinion, have we, since 9/11, actually fought this war in the way of being organized with our approach in the way of messaging, but also with a comprehensive policy to defeat this heinous ideology?
That's a brilliant question, because this is the thing, is you talk to families and others that have given the ultimate sacrifice. And, when President Trump announced the pulling of troops, he looked at the sky and said, they want us to leave. Really? We haven't even we fought it with our blood and treasure, but we haven't fought it ideologically. The Center for Public Diplomacy, that's part of the State Department, the Assistant Secretary, our U.S. Information Agency has not been reinvigorated, has not begun to fight this against political Islam because of all of the Islamists that are part of the State Department and that have prevented us from engaging in a counter-theopolitical, ideological strategy against the Islamists, be they Iranian Khomeinis or be it Saudi Wahhabis. And you saw this info ops, by the way, with the Khashoggi assassination, where you saw the Qatari lobby with Turkey shape American policy based from a guy who he should never have been killed. That was horrific, but he was an Islamist. Yeah. He wasn't a freedom fighter. So I think there's nothing that tells you more that we've lost the battle against political Islam globally than to see the reaction globally to Khashoggi being assassinated, while we called for the release of so many freedom fighters in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere that are true secular liberals that believe in religious freedom versus these Islamist operatives that really just are two sides of the same coin.
I just hope I know many people on Capitol Hill have reached out to you. You've testified before, and I hope the president brings you into his inner circle to fight this enemy, because you're an expert and you're somebody who has served all of us, including yourself and your family, in the way of serving in our armed forces. M. Zuhdi Jasser. Dr. Jasser is the founder and president of American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and he is co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement. He is also author of A Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim patriot's fight to save his faith. Dr. Jasser, I would talk to you until next year, literally, and I think you know that. It is a pleasure and honor, and thank you, and keep up the great work. Where can people find you on Twitter?
Twitter, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, DrZuhdiJasser, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser.
Love you. Thank you, man. Great to be with you. You take care.
God bless.
All right. Take care.